I am so sick and tired of people trying to justify the slaughter of American children on the altar of the National Rifle Association and the profits of the gun industry, and these fools who are arming for a race war in America. Because that's what it is. That's what's going on here. And we need to do something about this. And I think one of the things we need to do about this is to get these guns, particularly the weapons of mass destruction, the guns that are designed for military use, the guns that are designed to kill as many people as possible, as efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible, off the streets. Joe Biden yesterday called for an assault weapon ban. I agree with that. But I don't think we're going to get there until people realize how different these guns are and the damage they do is from what they see in the movies and from what they see on, in the cartoon. Basically, our whole media structure around weapons and whatnot it's cartoonish. And Mamie Till made the decision, Emmett Till's mother made the decision in 1955 to show her son's mutilated body in an open casket. And Jet Magazine had the courage to publish that. I've got a link to the actual picture in my article today. You should see it. And it rightly horrified America and energized, galvanized in many ways an already rapidly growing civil rights movement in the United States. This was 1 year after the Brown v. Board decision, for example. This was a moment of great ferment in America. But, the old saying that a picture is better than 1,000 words is true. Pictures have enormous power. Pictures have changed the course of history. The picture of that 9-year-old girl running down the dirt road in Vietnam with her clothes burned off from napalm had a significant and measurable effect on Americans' perception of what we were doing with napalm in Vietnam. I mean, there's been no shortage of times when pictures have, the abortion movement, or the anti-abortion movement. In 1973, the Supreme Court legalized abortion. In 1980, the Protestant hard right, the Jerry Falwell, Franklin Graham hard right, joined up with Ronald Reagan, and who had been a big supporter of abortion rights, by the way, who had signed into law the most liberal abortion law in the country as governor of California, and whose vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush's wife, was an open supporter of Planned Parenthood and the right to abortion. They all got together and said, oh, hey, we can politicize this. And then the so-called anti-abortion movement, the so-called, pro-life movement, a name, by the way, that they hijacked from the anti-death penalty movement in the mid-1970s. That movement started walking around with pictures of bloody fetuses. Just grotesque pictures. And the news media, repeated them and showed them. And that was the moment, according to people in the so-called pro-life movement, that was the moment that America's opinion about abortion started to change, or at least the opinions of many Americans. Pictures. I think this is the time to do this. Now, I'm not saying that we should just randomly be throwing out pictures. I think that this is something that there should be a meeting of some of the major media outlets, the 3 big television networks, at least the 2 largest newspapers in the country, the Times and the Post, maybe also the LA Times or a few others, Philadelphia Inquirer, Boston Globe. And they should come up with some kind of a standard for this. I mean, you don't want to, this should not be gratuitous, but it should be shocking. It wasn't until we started seeing the bodies coming home from Vietnam that we started really going, what? I mean, we did this with tobacco. Remember the tobacco ads that showed the guy with missing half his jaw? That was in the 90s. That led to that tobacco lawsuit that shut down the tobacco industry from marketing to kids and got tobacco out of vending machines and off shelves where kids could get them. Remember drunk driving? Mothers Against Drunk Driving? They started running ads showing people, dead people in cars or bloodied people. This is, frankly, I think it's way beyond time. Now, we're dancing up to the edge of it, and that's kind of the good news. Yesterday in the Washington Post, there was an op-ed, or an article, actually. What they did was they recreated the wounds to two of the children who had been shot at Sandy Hook. And this is a paragraph from yesterday's Washington Post. I'm going to read it to you, but which is something I'm wary of doing, but here it is. Because this is in print. This is a word version of the photos I'm calling for. Quote, "A Texas Ranger speaks of bullets that disintegrated a toddler's skull. This explains the lead poisoning that plagues survivors of the shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas. David Colbath, 61, can scarcely stand or use his hands without pain, and 25-year-old Morgan Workman probably can't have a baby. It explains the evisceration of small bodies, such as that of Noah Ponzer, 6, murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary, and Peter Wang, 15, killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The Post examined the way the bullets broke inside of them, obliterating Noah's jaw and Peter's skull, filling their chests with blood, and leaving behind gaping exit wounds." Back in 1996, there was a horrible violent mass shooting in Tasmania. Again, I mentioned this yesterday, but it bears repeating. Tasmania is one of the Australian states. It's an island just off the southern coast of Australia, but it's part of Australia, just like, Hawaii is part of the United States. And, this guy came in with an AR-15, or actually it was a AK-47, I believe, and just slaughtered people in an outdoor cafe. Now, the newspapers didn't explicitly publish the pictures of the dead bodies. A couple of them made them into the news, but those pictures were widely circulated. And the result of that was that John Howard, who was the Prime Minister of Australia at the time, who was to the right of Ronald Reagan. John Howard was a very conservative prime minister. John Howard pushed through their parliament a law banning all semi-automatic weapons in civilian hands, followed up by a gun buyback program that went into effect voluntarily, and over 700,000 people brought in their semi-automatic weapons and got large chunks of cash in exchange for them. And that was 27 years ago. In the decade before that, Australia had experienced multiple mass shootings. In the 27 years since then, they've had two shootings where more than three or four people were killed. That's it. 1996 was Australia's Emmett Till moment. America needs ours, and we need it now. What say you? What do you think? In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, let's blast off this rocket. It's the beginning of fall. It's the beginning of crazy political leading up to the election, generally nutso season. Congress, the Senate is back in session this week. The House comes back in session next week. And then it gets really wild because you've got the Cokehead Caucus, the so-called Freedom Caucus, absolutely committed to trying to crash the American economy and produce a depression so that, you know, Joe Biden won't get reelected. So it's going to get very, very weird. Also, between a quarter and a third of all Americans traveled somewhere over this Labor Day weekend, that we just finished. And there are several new COVID variants out floating around. Plus, it's been about a year since the last booster for most people. People over 65 could have gotten one this spring, but pretty much everybody else was last fall. And we know that the vaccine's effectiveness wanes substantially after 4 or 5 months, and a year out, it's pretty minimal. I mean, it might protect against serious illness and hospitalization, but it's not going to keep you from getting the disease. So the next 2 weeks are going to be pretty wild. I'm predicting. We'll see, right? I think this will be an indication of what it's going to be like this winter, you know, when we hit Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know, the holidays travel season. But it's the next 2 weeks might be a good time to stay out of public places if you're concerned about getting COVID. If you're not, you know, what the heck. But speaking for myself, I am. I'd rather not get COVID. Every time you get it, there's about a 10% increase in the chance that you'll get long COVID, and that can be a crippling lifelong debility, disability, excuse me. So, you know, who wants to get that? Anyhow, a lot to talk about today. No guests, just you and me for 3 hours. How term limits turn legislatures over to lobbyists. We'll get to that in just a moment. How the Democrats are going to inflict maximum GOP political pain as a showdown looms closer. We'll talk about that. Speaking of the doomed, just how doomed is it looking for Donald Trump? We'll get to that in the first hour. In the second hour of the program, how the Republican Party suckered America on tax cuts. Also, is Wisconsin just one step away from becoming an oligarchy? And America is contracting the money supply, and for the first time since the Great Depression. Is this an ominous sign? Also, in the third hour, housing. How do we protect one of the primary essentials of life? Also, did you know that just 2 people accounted for 600 of the 1,100 book removal requests in Florida? And we've got a geeky science. Sugary carbonated drinks are now linked, to depression. How strange is that? Depression. Incredible. So, but first I wanted to talk about how term limits turn legislatures over to lobbyists. We've had, you know, for the second time in public last week, you had Mitch McConnell freeze up for 30 seconds. This is apparently the consequences of the combination of having fallen and gotten a concussion and being 81 years old. And it's leading a lot of people to have a conversation. I mean, the number of boomers in Congress is way out of proportion to the number of boomers in the population, number one. Although I don't think that's unusual. I think the oldest generation, because it takes, you know, a career to, generally speaking, for people to work their way up to the House and particularly the Senate. But nonetheless, you've got, you know, a number of really elderly people, and let's also be clear, elderly is a highly subjective thing. Bernie Sanders is the exact same age as Mitch McConnell, but Bernie Sanders right now is traveling around the country promoting progressive values and you know, promoting good legislation. And I mean, he's the Energizer Bunny. Mitch McConnell is just kind of shuffling along and freezing. But in any case, this whole thing is leading to a conversation about what do we do about old people in Congress. Dianne Feinstein is another one that's provoking that conversation. And the solution that the Republican Party has, and they're, you know, the right-wing talk show hosts and the GOP are just pushing this really, really hard, is term limits. They're saying, well, we need to cut, you know, we need to limit people to 6 years, or at the most 12 years. We have 28 states that have term limits. They were all Republican controlled at the time that they put term limits into place. And we now know, I mean, this is an experiment that's been going on for about 20 years, and we now know what happens when you put into place term limits. The theory, the sales pitch is, you know, you get new blood and renewed vitality and all that kind of stuff. In reality, something quite different happens, which, by the way, is what Republicans want. In reality, what happens is that you strengthen the hand of the lobbyists and you discourage good people who are not rich from going into politics, and thus open the door, encourage rich people who might not be so interested in the public good to run for politics, to join, to become a member of public office. So how does that work? Well, here's how it happens. Typically, when a new person comes into Congress, and this is, you know, state legislatures, federal House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, whatever it may be, typically when a new person comes in, they find somebody who's been around for a while, you know, ideally 10, 20 years, somebody who has the institutional memory of the institution, who knows how things get done, who knows where the bodies are buried, you know, metaphorically, who understands how legislation gets made, who knows where the bathrooms are, you know, and you know, where the escape hatch is if the place gets raided by right-wingers again, all this kind of stuff. Well, what happens with term limits is that institutional memory is lost. The old-timers are gone. But the institutional memory actually lives on, sort of, because no Republican ever, anywhere, has ever suggested that lobbyists should be term limited. So here you've got in every legislature in the United States right now, and this has really exploded since 2010, when 5 Republicans, corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court in their Citizens United ruling fully legalized political bribery. And the consequence of that is that every single legislature in America has more lobbyists than it has legislators, including Congress. There's over 35,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. There's only, you know, 535 legislators. So the bottom line here is that this enormous, so when new people come into Congress, they go to lobbyists to find out where the bodies are buried. And of course, the lobbyists are going to put their own particular spin on things. You know, this is how, you know, it does more harm than good. Now, where did this fad start? This whole term limits fad? Because there was, you know, through most of the 20th century, there was no discussion of term limits. There was no sense of a need for term limits. But this all began in 1990. George Herbert Walker Bush, Pappy Bush also, was the president, and he was very unpopular. The Reagan recession, there had been 2 recessions as a result of Reagan's tax cuts. The war on organized labor was really starting to take a bite. We had not yet signed NAFTA. At that time, George Herbert Walker Bush was finishing the negotiations of it, which had started during the Reagan administration. But nonetheless, companies were already starting to offshore their products. Monopolies were forming all across the United States because in 1983, Reagan had basically ended the enforcement of our anti-monopoly laws. So here you had Pappy Bush, who was very unpopular, and he was looking for an issue that he could ride to victory in the 1992 election against Bill Clinton. At the time, he didn't know it would be Bill Clinton, but that's how it worked out. And so on December 12th, 1990, you know, a year and a month before the 1992 election, he rolled out through his chief of staff, John Sununu, term limits, This is from the New York Times. This is December 12, 1990, New York Times. President Bush has decided to push for a constitutional amendment to limit the number of terms for members of Congress, his chief of staff, John H. Sununu, said today. Doing so as he prepares for his re-election campaign will put Mr. Bush squarely and publicly on the side of an idea that is widely popular among voters and is wildly unpopular among members of Congress. Even though such passage of an amendment is unlikely, there's little risk for Mr. Bush in associating himself with this movement. Politically, the move fits nicely with a growing effort by the White House to depict Congress as the source of most of the nation's problems. See, things were not going well as a result of the Reagan Revolution. And Congress was pointing the finger at the White House, and Bush wanted to point the finger at Congress. So his whole term limits thing was really a scam. He never intended for it to pass. He didn't even, it was not even a serious effort. It was a campaign effort. But then Rush Limbaugh, whose show had started 2 years earlier in 1988, Rush Limbaugh picked this thing up and ran with it really hard for decades. And the whole right-wingosphere picked it up as well, because, as I said, it helps Republicans. It strengthens the lobbyists and weakens the legislatures, which is why every single time Republicans get control of a red state, they institute term limits. So far, we've got term limits now in Oklahoma. They got them in 1990 as a result of Bush's lobbying. And then all of these other states got them in 1992, which was the election year. Maine, California, Colorado, Arkansas, Michigan, Florida, Ohio, South Dakota, Montana, Arizona, and Missouri. Nevada and Louisiana put them into place in 1995 and 96, respectively, and Nebraska in 2000. North Dakota finally got around to it in 2022. And in every single case, it has hurt the legislatures. This 25 years later, this is the Citizens Research Council of Michigan in 2018 published a report titled 25 Years Later, Term Limits Have Failed to Deliver on Their Promise. And they note legislative term limits in Michigan have failed to achieve their proponents' stated goals, ridding government of career politicians, increasing diversity among elected officials, and making elections more competitive. Term limits have instead made state legislators, especially House members, view their time as a stepping stone to another office. Term limits have failed to strengthen ties between legislatures and their districts, or sever cozy relationships with lobbyists. They have weakened the legislature in its relation with the executive branch. There was a similar study about Florida. Bottom line, the other thing that I didn't mention that term limits do is they cause legislators, first of all, anybody who can't afford to lose their job after 6 years doesn't go in the first place. So only rich people go in, or people who are, fairly okay. But then they spend those 6 years sucking up to particular companies or industries in the hope that those companies or industries will then hire them when they get out of office. And so it even makes corruption worse. Now, are any of these Republican states going to undo their term limits? Probably not. But Republicans in every state in the union are pushing for term limits, including the states controlled by Democrats. Keep an eye on this. Term limits are poison. We already have them, by the way.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Called elections. That is term limits. We'll be back. Stay with us. And welcome back. Adam in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind today?
Hello. I just wanted to preface this call by stating that I strongly do not like Donald Trump. But I think you were mentioning on the show Thursday, I think it was, that about Donald Trump's mugshot. And unfortunately, I think the court rulings would favor Trump on this issue. It's a civil issue and not a criminal issue. And I've done a lot of research into this.
Are you talking about the copyright infringement?
Well, that could be argued. And the reason it could be argued is that in the 1860s, I think it was, when photography started coming around, the courts generally ruled that the subject of an image could claim ownership and property rights over that image as opposed to the photographer. And
unless the subject signs a waiver. And when you're arrested, you are signing a waiver.
but the thing is it's not completely clear. Like a clear public notice isn't given. A statement to opt out is not given, and that's generally
all of those things are part of the arrest, Adam. When you are arrested, you are subject to a legal process, and that legal process includes having your mugshot taken. It's not your property.
Well, that also depends, because in federal cases, that's not the case. The U.S. government isn't permitted to copyright its booking photos, so now you have contradictions between the counties and the federal government, but also the courts have generally
I don't think the federal
ruled
government can copyright any photos. Can they?
Right. So what I'm trying to say is that you now have contradictory court rulings on images and mugshots. For example, there are three different types of items that I could bring up. One is like revenge porn, which boyfriends and stuff were like posting nude images of their girlfriends, and the courts have ruled that this was unlawful and ruled that since the women did not have consent, that this was unlawful. And then there's also a case of EA Sports which they were posting, they were using images of college basketball players, and the courts have ruled that that was also violated the rights. And then you can also bring up the fact that the Fifth Amendment states that public property, you can't take property, the government can't take property without providing just compensation. And people have argued that the image, even in a mugshot, is
your property.
Their property.
So it would be interesting to see Fulton County assert their copyright claim, have Donald Trump fight it, have it go to the Supreme Court, and have this decided once and for all.
But you know what's interesting is the whole mugshot. They developed a mugshot industry in 2010, in which online companies were setting up scraping mugshots from county websites, and then putting them on the search engines and trying to blackmail people to remove those images off the search records. And based on that, lawsuits developed off of that. And Georgia was actually one of the states that made it illegal for this to be done.
Interesting. Okay. Adam, thank you. Fascinating stuff. 22 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. You know, Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is, what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist, but we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. And welcome back. So I mentioned that, you know, the House of Representatives is coming back into session next week. The Senate starts this week. And the House will have 3 weeks, basically. And in those 3 weeks, I believe they're going to have 10 legislative days. I might be wrong on that. It might be 14. It might be more than that. But in any case, it's not going to be, you know, the 21 days of 3 weeks. Kevin McCarthy typically holds the House in session 3, sometimes 4 days a week. So there's going to be a very brief period of time in which to pass these 12 pieces of legislation that are basically the standard pieces that keep the government going. And none of them have so far been passed. Zero. One of them, has made it to the floor. But so here we now we have the House Freedom Caucus. I call them the Cokehead Caucus because they all, take so much support and money from basically the old Koch network, which is now way beyond just Charles Koch. And they are absolutely committed to trying to crash the economy this fall in the hopes that it'll produce a serious recession that will last into the election period next year. Because, Biden's running around the country right now bragging about Bidenomics, and, with good reason. The economy is doing better than it's done since the 60s in many regards. But, these guys are absolutely committed to this. So now the Democrats are saying, okay, number one, we are going to try to work with moderate Republicans in the House of Representatives to pass legislation. Now, the kicker here is Kevin McCarthy has to approve of it. He has absolute control over what comes to the floor of the House, barring a discharge petition, which is unlikely, although you never know. So Democrats are saying, we're going to try and work this out. But if they can't work it out, if Kevin McCarthy stands in the way, then the plan B is to use the damage that this will do to America to publicize it and make the Republicans own it. This is, in essence, the two Santa Claus theory all over again. And only now with an extra bit of malice thrown into it, the shut the government down part. And so keep an eye on this. This is going to get, this is a really high stakes thing. It's going to affect the economy of the entire world, as well as the United States. And the big question is, how does the media deal with this? Are they going to let the Republicans get away with this and blame it on Democrats or Biden or whatever? Or are they going to put the blame where it belongs if this happens? So stay tuned, as they say in the radio business. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking of doomed, just how doomed is it looking for Donald Trump? I'll tell you about that and pick up your calls on the other side of the break. I am so sick and tired. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Transgender Warriors, Making History from Joan of Arc to Marshall P. Johnson and Beyond by Leslie Feinberg. This is from the preface. Are you a guy or a girl? I've heard the question all my life. The answer is not so simple, since there are no pronouns in the English language as complex as I am, and I don't want to simplify myself in order to neatly fit one or the other. There are millions more like me in the United States alone. We have a history filled with militant heroes and heroines, yet therein lies the rub. How can I tell you about their battles when the words woman and man, feminine and masculine are almost the only words that exist in the English language to describe all the vicissitudes of bodies and styles of expression? Living struggles accelerate changes in language. I heard language evolve during the 1960s when I came out into the drag bars of Western New York and Southern Ontario. At that time, the only words used to describe us, cut and seared, yelled at us in the window of a screeching car filled with potential bashers. There were no words that we'd go out of our way to use that made us feel good about ourselves. When we all first heard the word gay, some of my friends vehemently opposed the word on the grounds that it made us sound happy. No one will ever use gay, my friends assured me, each offering an alternative word, none of which took root. I learned that language can't be ordered individually as if it's from a Sears catalog. It is forged collectively in the fiery heat of struggle. Right now, much of the sensitive language that was won by the liberation movement in the United States during the 60s and 70s is bearing the brunt of a right-wing backlash as being politically correct. Where I come from, being politically correct means using language that respects other people's oppressions and wounds. This chosen language needs to be defended. The words I use in this book may become outdated in a very short time because the transgender movement is still young and defining itself. But while the slogans lettered on the banners may change quickly, the struggle will rage on. Since I am writing this book as a contribution to the demand for transgender liberation, the language I'm using in this book is not aimed at defining, but at defending the diverse communities that are coalescing. I don't have a personal stake in whether the trans liberation movement results in a new third pronoun or gender-neutral pronouns like the ones such as Z, she or he, and here, her, his, being experimented with in cyberspace. It is not the words in and of themselves that are important to me, it's our lives. The struggle of trans people over the centuries is not a his story or her story, it's a our story. I've been called a he, she, butch, bulldagger, crossdresser, passing woman, female to male transvestite, and drag king. The word I prefer to use to describe myself is transgender. Today, the word transgender has at least two colloquial meanings. It has been used as an umbrella term to include everyone who challenges the boundaries of sex and gender. It is also used to draw a distinction between those who reassign the sex they were labeled at birth and those of us whose gender expression is considered inappropriate for our sex. Presently, many organizations, from Transgender Nation in San Francisco to Monmouth Ocean Transgender on the Jersey Shore, use this term inclusively. I asked many self-identified transgender activists who are named or pictured in this book who they believed were included under the umbrella term. Those polled named transsexuals, transgender, transvestites, transgenderists, big enders, drag queens, drag kings, crossdressers, masculine women, feminine men, intersexuals, people referred to in the past as hermaphrodites, androgynes, cross-genders, shapeshifters, passing women, passing men, gender benders, gender blenders, bearded women, and women bodybuilders who have crossed the line of what is considered socially acceptable for a female body. But the word transgender is increasingly being used in a more specific way as well. The term transgenderist was first introduced into the English language by trans warrior Virginia Prince. Prince told me, quote, "I coined the term transgenderist in 1987 or 88. There had to be some name for people like myself who trans the gender barrier, meaning somebody who lives full-time in the gender opposite to their anatomy. I have not transed the sex barrier," end quote. As the overall transgender movement has developed, more people are exploring this distinction between a person's sex, female, intersexual, male, and their gender expression, feminine, androgynous, masculine, and other variations. Many national and local gender magazines and community groups are starting to use TS/TG, transsexual and transgender. Under Western law, doctors glance at the genitals of an infant and pronounce the baby female or male, and that's that. Transsexual men and women traverse the boundary of the sex they were assigned at birth. And in dominant Western cultures, the gender expression of babies is assumed at birth. Pink for girls, blue for boys. Girls are expected to grow up feminine, boys masculine. Transgender people traverse, bridge, or blur the boundary of the gender expression that they were assigned at birth. The book is Transgender Warriors Making History from Joan of Arc to Marsha P. Johnson and Beyond by Leslie Feinberg. Transgender Warriors. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. All righty, speaking of doomed, how's Donald Trump doing? Well, Adam Schiff over the weekend has called for Donald Trump to be banned from running for office under the 14th Amendment. This has prompted squeals of outrage from our former president. He's quite upset about this. He calls him Shifty Schiff and all that kind of stuff. But Schiff says it's very clear that Trump, quote, engaged in acts of insurrection or rebellion against America's government and gave aid and comfort to those who do By the way, I would add that Trump recently did a fundraiser for January 6th defendants. And so anyhow, Adam Schiff goes on to say, and so he must be disqualified from the ballot because he fits the 14th Amendment's ban on traitors and insurrectionists to a T. Amen. That said, more than 55%, I think it was 57% was the poll that was issued this morning, was released this morning, of Republicans, of registered Republicans, are planning on voting for Donald Trump in the primary. It looks like he's going to be the party's nominee, which, you know, for better or for worse, this is going to be interesting. Also, Jenna Ellis, who was his lawyer for some time and was one of the more aggressive, you know, conspiracy nuts around, and that's not to broad brush all conspiracy nuts, because I'm one of them, you know, or have been labeled such with regard to the JFK assassination, but she was off the edge, right? She just went off the edge, and still is. But she is now rather pissed off. She endorsed Ron DeSantis, and Donald Trump has dumped her, and he's refusing to pay her bills, and she's looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills and the possibility of going to prison for 20, 30 years. And so she took to X, Twitter, you know, former Twitter, and said, quote, has Trump defended the J6ers? Has Trump defended the indicted lawyers? Has Trump defended the pastors jailed or threatened with fines over Fauci's failed COVID policies? Has he paid for anyone's legal defense except himself? And, oh, and Jason Miller's child support lawyer? She says, I have no donations to fight a weaponized government. I encourage people to donate it. I encouraged people to donate it to the first New York indictment. I do have a problem with Trump using little grandma's pensions to pay for Jason Miller's child support battles. Right. So as Newsweek pointed out, watch Ellis carefully now. When Trump cuts someone off, it's the tipping point. The result is the person flips on Trump. My bet is Ellis will cooperate. Meanwhile, Mark Meadows looks like he's planning on flipping. He was the guy who was very much in the room for almost all of this stuff. He was Trump's chief of staff, former member of Congress, former cokehead, the cokehead caucus, the so-called Freedom Caucus. And Politico wrote a lengthy piece about Mark Meadows and his strategy, his stay-out-of-jail strategy here. And they say, during the hearing in Atlanta, a defense attorney for Meadows called attention to Trump's prominent role in this case. Meadows arranged the pivotal call with Rafson Perger, but after prosecutors played audio of the call in the courtroom, an attorney for Meadows emphasized that his client's part in the discussion was both minor and less provocative than Trump's. So, you know, he's already started to essentially flip on Trump, as has Yuscil Taveras, the IT director down at Mar-a-Lago, who has dumped the Trump lawyer, Trump-funded lawyer, and has picked up a local lawyer, public defender, and has changed his testimony and said, yeah, Trump told me to delete the footage, which is, you know, a cover-up. It's a crime. Politico also noted that 3 of the Georgia fake electors who have been charged in the 19-count indictment down in Georgia, David Schaefer, Kathleen Latham, and Sean Still, have all said in court filings that they did what they did specifically at the direction of Donald Trump. So, and Mark Meadows, you know, he said, well, I did it. He said, what I didn't want to happen was for the campaign to prevail in court action and not have this. Why, asked the prosecutor, Anna Cross. He said, because I knew I'd be yelled at by the President of the United States. So this is Meadows' defense. I was just doing what Trump told me to do, and if I didn't do it, he would yell at me, and I can't deal with that. So we'll see where this goes. All right, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
This morning early on Pacifica Radio in L.A., they played your previous day's show for a couple hours, and you read an excerpt from a book on PTSD, and I was glad to hear it. Previously, when I had called in, I introduced this idea of moral injury as an alternative, not to replace or to discredit the PTSD model, but that this thing called moral injury.
What am I missing here, Michael? What does this have to do with any of the topics we're talking about today?
Well, it's because of what I heard on the radio this morning from yesterday.
I see.
So I wanted to share a couple of terms with you, if I may, that would be an improvement over some of the more rabid mainstream terms. One of them being trigger versus, I'll give you an alternative. With PTSD, people get triggered. I think we can, understand that. It's just certain things will just set them off automatically on kind of a...
what's your point, Michael?
Well, I wanted to introduce the idea of, instead of using trigger, to use tripwire, because if you tripwire something, then it brings something to your attention, whereas trigger just relates too strongly to firearms.
I got it. Okay, thank you, Michael. Just FYI, summer's over. We're going to ask callers to please stay on topic here. For the topics that we're talking about today. Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm just going to go on this theme of the stripping away of standards in our education. Mm-hmm. And this goes into the COVID emergency, where so much of medical nursing education went online while the kids were trying to get their educations. Last fall, the candidates for the RN license exam in Canada and U.S. failed at a rate of 45%. 45% of the candidates
compared to previous
exam.
years. How does that shape?
These are the kids who had to go through the online. We're trying to do our best to substitute for an actual education. And the response at the time when I was reading in the papers was from, corporate health in America, in the U.S., was, well, just lower the standard, lower the passing grade. And I was kind of waiting around to see where this, came out. And I was talking to an executive here in Idaho who's the chief of a nursing advocacy group. We're trying our best to get our education back. And he told me the fix is in. It's mandated that 80% of all RN candidates now pass that exam in at least my state. I don't know about the other states, but I imagine it's the same.
I can't speak to that, Susan. It's off topic, and I haven't done any research on it. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what the previous fail rates are, but thanks for the data point. I'll try to, I'll keep my eyes open. Picking up your calls here, Alan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Let me make this quick. If a friend of mine was wrong, I would be the first one to be able to acknowledge maybe my friend needs to check his facts, X, Y, and Z. And the reason why I bring that up is in 2016, Mitch McConnell didn't want to finish the job as far as the impeachment situation, let the courts and the Democrats do it. And all I did was just listen and pay attention. And then he has his health situation going down. And Joe Biden's response, my President Joe Biden, well, that's my friend and I wish him well. If that's your friend, you need to check him.
Well, that was his response to Mitch having a medical crisis. And these two guys served together in the Senate for 30 plus years.
Exactly.
Apparently they're friends.
Apparently he hasn't. If they're friends, that's a friend I wouldn't want to be. I want to be a part of. That's why I say the concept of good cop, bad cop. You understand that scenario? Good cop, bad cop. I think the Democrats are playing in the same scenario. Good cop, bad cop scenario. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I took it at face value. I think that it is possible to get to know people and like people who are politically very different than you. And in fact, that's a skill in many regards in a legislative body where you've got to compromise on things. And if people are going on in the United States, you've got Republicans trying to ban. What happened? They're trying to ban books. We just hit the break here, and Alan, I'm sorry, I gotta run here. How do we get into a break? We're going to declare a break. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. How, Jews are paying to have I'm hearing brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Yeah, that's right. There we go. All right. We've got gremlins in the board this morning. All right, picking up your calls here. Mark in San Jose. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I'm Mark, the union rep. I was going to say that the easier way to say about term limits is ExxonMobil replacing Goldman Sachs.
I don't know what that means.
Well, that's how I explain it on Facebook, that you're just replacing a Goldman Sachs tool with an ExxonMobil tool. And I also have 3 surreal gifts during Snake Oil 19, which is 3 short stories.
Mark, I'm sorry, this is not making any sense. Kurt in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind today?
Okay, thank you, Tom, and hopefully I'll make some sense for you. A lot of the goofballs are out today, huh?
Apparently.
The reason I'm calling is you were talking about your term limit stuff, and that got me to thinking here about Stark County, Ohio, which is where I grew up but no longer live there. I live in Summit County, but Stark County, Ohio, we have a state legislator and a state senator, Kirk Schuring and Scott Oslager. And I'm looking here at Wikipedia, so take the source for what it is. I'm looking at Kirk Schuring's Wikipedia page. He's been a member of the Ohio House of Representatives. Let's see here, back and forth from January 3rd, 1995 through December 31st, 2018. Mm-hmm. And he's been going back and forth with Scott Oslager because they both seem to be playing political musical chairs because of the term limits here in the state of Ohio.
Oh, interesting. So the term limits in Ohio specify consecutive terms. Is that the deal? So you can get around it by skipping a term?
Yeah, because another great example is Jim Rhodes, and we all know who Jim Rhodes was. Uh-huh. He was the governor from 1963 to 1971, and he could not run in 1970 because he could not run for a third consecutive term in 1970. Right. So he ran for the U.S. Senate and lost to Bob Taft Jr.
Right.
So that's a good thing. But he came back in 1974 and defeated the incumbent John Gilligan, who was the Democrat who won in 1970. And then Jim Rhodes was our governor from 1975 to 1983, and then he tried again in 1986, and he's never been governor since 1983.
Huh. So, well, that's got to be, I don't know if it's unique to Ohio, but I mean, that's sort of like what Medvedev and Putin did. It's like, let's just go back and forth.
It's corruption. It's Republican corruption. And to add insult to injury, I just found out that my state representative, Robert Young, and I'm not talking about Jim Anderson from Father Knows Best, who's the Akron representative where I live, he got in trouble for some domestic violence with his wife, and he violated the terms of the restraining order, and now he's been picked up and mugshotted. So God only knows what this Republican's going to do.
You know, I have been reading, Kurt, that you, in your state, in Ohio, you have literally the most corrupt state government in the United States. Is that does that make sense to you as an Ohioan?
It sure does. I mean, my gosh, if we can elect people like Bob Taft twice and John Kasich, he's kind of a wishy-washy kind of guy. And now we got Mike DeWine for, gosh, at least till the next term. And then we'll probably end up with Frank LaRose running against Sherrod Brown. And that's a guy that needs to be outed, too, for his garbage.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Kurt, thanks for the call. Yeah, appreciate it. We'll be back in 60 seconds. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we have this major culture war going on in the United States. You've got Republicans trying to ban abortion. They're trying to ban books. Not just trying to, they're actually doing all of these things. Banning books, banning trans girls in sports, attacking basically the entire queer community. Whatever they can to try to sow division and hate, promoting Nazi memes, talking about how, Jews are paying to have black and brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Oh, yeah, that's right. If they can get us fighting against each other, if they can get us hating each other, we will ignore their efforts to cut their taxes and deregulate their industries. There's a whole video about it at tom.tv. Check it out. Accomplished it. Hopefully we're back. All right. Thank you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Look, my general comment is about the economy and how unions tie in. And something I think we're all kind of missing about unions and their importance. And frankly, it was Governor Walker in his interview this morning about Trump that made me think of it. Scott Walker was asked what
former Governor Walker.
Former Governor Scott Walker, yes. He was asked if what if Trump is convicted or indicted and then found guilty, right? How is that going to affect Trump voters? He said, well, there's two types of Trump voters. There's the ones that believe the election was stolen and they find the timing of all this suspicious. And he said, then there's that other group of Trump voters that are honestly, just want Trump's accomplishments, all he achieved. They want that back. Now, that's the part that got me, Tom. Check this out. I just had to quit a job because I got into another physical altercation with a Trump voter, and I was not happy. But then when I went to my new job, I actually ran into a Trump voter that's a decent person, Tom. I mean, the guy is a mess. I mean, he's going up under the bridge. I really worry for him, but he doesn't have the luxury of political opinions. He lives in Idaho, and he just does what his neighbors tell him. And he doesn't even own a gun, but he loves guns. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. The guy is basically innocent. Now, this got me thinking about unions. If you've ever worked for an aggressively anti-union company, you know this. Their whole spiel on why they're anti-union sounds a lot like a union. Like, for instance, they say a union rep, you don't even know who that person is. Why are you giving them all your personal
information? Right, and they say, we want to protect your pension and we want to protect you. Quack, quack, quack. Yeah, I get it. So is your point that, some Trump voters are what, decent people? I mean, I know that for a fact. I mean, I know decent people who are Trump voters. I don't understand their politics, but I know that, deep down inside, they're not terrible people. Although, I'm starting to wonder what percentage of them are secretly racists, because it seems like that's his primary appeal. Not just starting to wonder. I've been wondering for some time.
I can summarize my point. You've brought it up a lot of times. Basically, thanks to Reaganomics, and I think you track it back to Nixon, really. The only thing that's not an expense, right? Workers' salaries are an expense. The only thing that is not an expense is an executive salary. That's what it comes down to, Tom.
Well, that's an expense to a corporation.
I know, but they don't look at it as they will cut a worker's salary as an expense.
But they never go after the executives. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Excellent point, Dave. Thank you. Glenn in Kalama, Washington. Hey, Glenn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. This question is about Trump and his passport. I don't know much about this subject, but you're a world traveler. Maybe you could educate me a little bit. Do you have to have a passport to leave the country, or when you enter another country? On those rare occasions when your passport gets checked as you're leaving the country, it's usually by the airline, because they don't want to have to pay to fly you back home if you get to the foreign country and then you discover that you don't have your passport with you.
So they check them before you get on the plane, but that's not a federal requirement. We don't require people to notify the government when they leave the country here in the United States. Some countries do that, but not the United States.
Well, what brought this up to me was last week a caller identified the fact that he cannot make it to Saudi Arabia unless he makes a stop somewhere. So he's going to need his passport to enter Scotland so he can fake like he's going golfing.
Right.
And I think he'll go to Scotland and then to Saudi Arabia.
I think you're right.
But
or
the
Ireland.
thing is under RICO, we can confiscate his property, so that'll be about $2 billion, and I think the government's kind of wishing for that to happen. They're not going to take his passport. I think they're just kind of begging him to leave.
It might be the best thing for the country if Donald Trump were to hop on a plane and flee to Saudi Arabia. I'm skeptical that it's going to happen before the handwriting is just clearly on the wall that he's going to go to prison. And I think that he will have appeals. I mean, even if he gets convicted, even if he gets sentenced to jail, he will have an appeal process available to him. And if he can manage to stay out of jail during that appeal process, you know, he probably will stick around. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see, Glenn. I just don't know. Thanks for the call. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, you got a quick one here? I got about 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
Oh, well, thanks, Tom. Yeah, no, I just remind people the social contract is what Trump is not living up to. The social contract is the leader that helps the village keep an eye out, not the guy that it's all about me. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Trump is wasting our time. He never used our tax dollars wisely. He's always built his own projects, and he violates the social contract, the guardian of the village.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave earlier said, you know, he had a Trump voter who said he wanted Trump's accomplishments back, and I don't know what that is, other than, you know, building a few miles of wall and tearing children from their mothers down on the southern border, which, you know, amplifies, you know, my suspicion that it's really all about the racism when it comes to Trump. But, you know, I don't know. David, thank you. I agree. He is not keeping the social contract. That's an excellent point. Phew. All right. How the Republican Party suckered Americans on tax cuts. We'll get to that. And also, is Wisconsin just one step away from oligarchy? And America is contracting the money supply. This is rather troubling news. I'll share all those with you on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
At a recent congressional
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air. So you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, Quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program here in well, it's not officially the first day of fall, but it's kind of the end of the summer season, I think. I think you could safely say that, right? We are back. It's September. Ian Millhiser, who's been a guest on this program many times, is the senior legal correspondent over at Vox, the online publication. And he's talking about what's going on in Wisconsin. And I think this is actually, even though it's not a national story, I think it is a national story because there are other states that are doing or have done or are trying to do what Republicans in Wisconsin did, which is, about a decade ago, they got a trifecta. They got control of actually a quadfecta. They got control of the governor's mansion, the House, the Senate, and took control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And then they started gerrymandering like there was just no tomorrow. They have gerrymandered that state so heavily that in the 2018 election, all of the statewide offices, or not all of them, but most of the statewide offices went in the neighborhood of 54% for Democrats. And yet, the Republicans retained a supermajority in the Wisconsin State House of Representatives. Now, Democrats sued to get the gerrymandered maps rejected because, hey, how can you have a supermajority, more than 2/3 of all the people in the House of Representatives are Republicans, when more than half of all people in the state voted for a Democrat? How is that possible? Well, that's what gerrymandering does. With gerrymandering, politicians pick their voters. It should be the voters pick their politicians. But that ain't what you get with gerrymandering. So Democrats sued, took this to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The Wisconsin Supreme Court, which was controlled by Republicans at the time, said, hey, this is good with us, no problem. We're going to keep these maps in place. So then we had an election, just a short while ago in Wisconsin, a special election for the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which was, by the way, the swing seat. This is the seat that would determine whether the court is progressive or retrograde or Republican, Nazified. And Janet Preskowitz, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. I know I'm mispronouncing it, but I can't remember how to pronounce her name. Prosiowicz. Anyway, she won the election. And she is a Democrat and a progressive. Now, in the past, when she was asked before she was elected, she was asked by a reporter, do you think these maps that the Republicans have pushed through are gerrymandered, are inappropriate? And she said, yes, they are clearly gerrymanders, which was not a political statement as much as simply telling the truth. I mean, you would think all the Republicans would agree with that, too. But now that she's been elected, she has not yet taken her seat yet. She'll be sworn in, I believe, next month. Or maybe this month, sometime in the next couple of months, next few weeks. Now the Republicans are talking about impeaching her, trying to prevent her from even taking her office, or if she does take her office, impeaching her right away, because they know that there's a new lawsuit by Democrats on these gerrymandered districts, and the Supreme Court will now be, Democratic majority, and they will throw out the maps and order new maps that actually reflect the will of the Wisconsin voters. And the Republican Party does not want that because they are not at all in favor of voters' desires being met. Keep in mind, the vast majority of American voters want strengthened Social Security. Republicans are still trying to privatize it. The vast majority of Americans want a strong Medicare system. The Republicans are still trying to privatize that, and with some success, by the way, with the Medicare Advantage scam. The vast majority of Americans want, to be able to vote by mail and to be able to conveniently vote. Republicans don't want that. They're outlawing it in state after state. The vast majority of Americans want the environment clean. The Republicans don't want that. They want to do away with the EPA. I mean, I could go down the list, but you get it. Republicans don't care what voters want. They just care about having power so that they can deliver for the billionaires who own them. And now, Judge Janet is going to be on the Supreme Court, and Ian Millhiser says whether it's the state legislature stepping in through impeachment or federal courts stepping in through some sort of an injunction, and there is a federal lawsuit as well to stop her from overturning the gerrymandered maps or even possibly serving on the Supreme Court. He says if something like that happens, the message will be sent to the people of Wisconsin that essentially Wisconsin is now an oligarchy. There is a legislative body that is not only elected by the people, but in practice can only be held by Republicans. And all of the powers that be have one by one been taken away. All of the leverage that used to be used to do something about gerrymandering until there's nothing left. So keep an eye on this. This case in Wisconsin is going to be actually quite important, I think. Meanwhile, some weird economic news, and I don't frankly know what to make of this because there's contradicting, in the first hour here, I told you how Republicans are doing everything in the House of Representatives are committed to doing everything they can to crash the American economy this fall so that, in the hopes that the economy will still be in the tank in November of next year when it's time for Joe Biden to run for re-election. So there's that. But there's also a number of other things that are worth looking at. The U.S. money supply, M2, which is all of the cash and coins in circulation, individual checking accounts, money market accounts, savings accounts, certificates of deposit below $100,000. That's M2. And basically it's, how much money is available in the United States. And M2 goes back a long, long ways. And interestingly, every time the money supply over the last 153 years, every time the money supply has dropped, there's been a serious recession or what in the 19th century were referred to as financial panics. One in 1870, one in 1893, one in 1921, one in 1931 through 1933, and one in 2023. And that's the one I'm concerned about because it just happened. As of July, we just got the numbers, M2 was 3.69% below the all-time high that was recorded a year ago in July of 2022. Now, there's two possible ways to interpret this. The more charitable way, the more reassuring way, is that we jacked up the money supply hugely during the last year of the Trump administration and the first year of the Biden administration in order to keep us from sliding into a recession as a result of COVID. In fact, we increased the money supply by 26% on a year-over-year basis. So dialing it back 3.69% is not radical at all. In fact, that's, we're still in a broadly expanded money supply. That said, every time it goes down, you get a recession. And it just went down. I'm inclined to think that this is not as big a deal as the headline suggests because of that huge expansion of the money supply the preceding year. But it does mean that banks have less cash available, the money supply shrinking, and that means that there's less capital for businesses to hire, to acquire, to innovate, to build new products, to build new factories. I mean, just right across the board. Other data that kind of points to this is the what's called the ISM Manufacturing New Orders Index. And this is where companies that are manufacturing, if you're making things, if you're making washing machines, or you're making televisions, or you're making, anything, copper pipe, it's whatever. If you're making anything, one of the things that you do is you look out at the economic forecasts and you ask, or you try to figure out, is the economy growing or shrinking? Is there going to be more demand for my products a year from now when they finally make it to market, or 6 months from now if I'm just buying stuff I'm going to resell? But for manufacturing, it's typically a little more long term, because you've got to buy the raw materials and then you turn them into a finished product. Is there going to be demand or not? And so when the new orders index, the ISM Manufacturing New Orders Index drops, that indicates that manufacturing companies believe that a recession is ahead. And August just wrapped up, and August marked the 12th consecutive month of contraction for the ISM Manufacturing New Orders Index. Now, this has only happened 3 times in the last 75 years. Once was in 1981, and we had a recession in 82. Once was in 2008, and we had a severe recession, a crash in 2009. And once was the last 12 months. That, while the money supply numbers don't freak me out so much, that does. But then on the other hand, you got Goldman Sachs coming out and saying that, last month they were saying there's a 20% chance we're going to slide into a recession in the next 12 months. Now they've downgraded that to a 15% chance. They're saying, in other words, there's an 85% chance we won't have a recession. Now, this is one of several opinions that Goldman Sachs has put out. But this is from one of their economists. He said, we still strongly disagree with the notion that a growing drag on the long and variable lags of monetary policy will push the economy toward recession. In other words, we disagree that Jerome Powell's efforts to stop inflation by cooling down the economy are going to cause a recession. In fact, what they're saying is that, by the way, Bloomberg is predicting a 60% chance of a recession. So this is, I don't know if this is the outlier or if this is just contradictory. But what they're saying is that the Fed is almost certainly not going to raise interest rates any farther, or if they do, it'll be in 0.25% increments rather than 0.5, rather than half-point increments. And those will not crash the economy. Now, I've been telling you for a long time that, Jerome Powell is a lifelong Republican and a professional bankster. And I'm skeptical, about Jerome Powell. I'm of the opinion that this guy may have a political agenda. I know that he doesn't want to be seen that way. But, he's a lifelong Republican and a banker. And throwing the country into a recession might be a good thing for the bankers. Recessions are always good things for billionaires. They're always good things for investors because everything gets cheap. You can buy up, stock cheap. The stock market crashes during recessions. It's a great buying opportunity. Companies go under and you can buy out their inventory or buy out the entire company. Billionaires love recessions. So keep an eye on this. I have no certainty about any of this. I have no idea what the future is going to bring. But these are signs that I think we shouldn't ignore. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is an amazing story, too. Stay with us. These book removal. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Lynn in Los Angeles. Hey, Lynn, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hi, the flip there is the Trump case in Georgia is very complicated. The more I look into it, the crazier it gets. Trump is probably going to blame his lawyers, Cheesebro, Powell, and Eastman, for advising him to, contest the election. So he's going to try to throw them. Yes, and they know that. So they have asked for a speedy trial in that county, in Fulton County. Why? Because they're the majority of the jury pool in that county are anti-Trumpers, and then they can say, they can blame him instead of being blamed themselves.
I agree with your analysis.
Throw him under the bus. And the other.
The question is whether they'll get their speedy trial. It's
yes,
really interesting.
I know there's so much.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is the October 1st is the first day that the SB 92 state law will allow them to, complain against any district attorney, or including Fani Willis,
right. and then remove them.
Some people. And remove them. And then, on top of that, if she is removed, she cannot work again and be elected or appointed for 10 years from the date of removal. But on the other hand, I heard Greg Palast talking about her assistant, who is a killer, Anna Jones. So, I'm just throwing out a bunch of different random things that are so complicated, dramatic. It could go, one way or the other, and it's just very complicated.
You're absolutely right, Lynn. And this, I think probably this week it's going to get resolved as to whether the three cases, the Cheeseboro case and I believe the Trump case, have already moved into federal court, or maybe it's the Mark Meadows case. I think it's the Meadows case, actually. Have been grabbed by the federal courts, but that's a very temporary situation. They might get tossed back into the state courts.
Well, I know Meadows asked for federal because he knows if it goes into that jury pool, they're very pro-Trump, and you have to have a unanimous decision.
That's
and
right.
It only takes one crackpot, MAGA person to say no, I don't agree, and then the case gets thrown out and he goes free. So, oh my God, it's so complicated.
Yeah, Fani Willis
one last thing.
Well, if I could just amplify your point here, and then back to you. Fani Willis's jury pool will pull from Fulton County. If it goes to federal court, it pulls from the federal district, which is northern Georgia, which is, Fani Willis's Atlanta is mostly black and very Democratic. Northern Georgia is almost solid white and very Republican. So, yeah.
Exactly. I totally agree. Well, the last thing is the other case in D.C. The judge, Tanya Chutkan, not Chutkan. Be the first person in media to pronounce her name correctly. I heard her being, at the hearing where she was nominated for judge, and what's his name from the guy that got kicked out? Anyway, there was a hearing, and she introduced herself, and she said, "My name is Chutkan." So, and then the other thing about that is, yes, we can. Think positive. So I just hope everybody pronounces her name correctly. Judge Chutkan. Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. Judge Chutkan, indeed. And she's a total badass, this woman. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We tend to think that this blood-soaked moment in American history is unique, with all these mass shootings and school shootings. And in some ways it is. Mass shootings and school shootings are relatively new phenomena in the American landscape. But back in the 1930s, at least the early 1930s, we had a very analogous situation with armed gangs, roaming through our streets and just killing people indiscriminately. We still remember a lot of their names. It was Bonnie and Clyde and Machine Gun Kelly and John Dillinger and Babyface Nelson and Pretty Boy Floyd and Ma Barker and Al Capone. And the country said enough. They were all using fully automatic weapons. We passed a law in 1934, the National Firearms Act. Didn't outlaw them, just put a tax on them, and that was the end of that. I'm suggesting we should extend that tax to all semi-automatic weapons. There's a whole rant about it at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour. The other big story I want to share with you this hour, we'll get into the two people accounting for all these book bans in the next hour, is how the Republican Party suckered America on tax cuts. I find this an absolutely amazing story. First off, and this is something most Americans don't understand, tax cuts affect working people not at all and affect rich people hugely. Tax increases affect working people not at all and affect rich people hugely. Now, I can hear you saying right now, wait a minute, I make $30,000 a year, and if my taxes are cut, I'll make $32,000 a year take home. I'm taking home $30,000 a year, and I'm making $35,000 and I'm taking home $32,000, and if my taxes are cut, I'll take home $33,000. Yeah, that's true for the first year. But what happens is, and this is, David Ricardo laid this out in 1809 in his book that laid out what he referred to as the iron law of labor and taxation. The labor market in the United States, well, labor markets all around the world are not pre-tax markets. They're post-tax markets. They're take-home pay markets. So if the city knows that bus drivers will drive buses for $30,000 a year, that take-home pay, they've got to have that in their pocket. And I'm just pulling numbers out of the air here. I have no idea what the city pays bus drivers. I'm sure it's a hell of a lot more than that. But anyhow, let's just say it was $30,000 a year. The median income in the United States is around $33,000 right now. So let's just say that. That's take-home. Now, if taxes go down on working class people, then bus drivers start taking home more than $30,000 a year. Now, the city knows that they'll work for only $30,000. So what are they going to do? They're going to cut pay going forward. And that's how it works. What we've seen, there were tax cuts on working class people in the 1980s and 90s. And what happened? Wages went down. Now, it's the opposite for rich people. When rich people get tax cuts, they keep more money. And when taxes go up, they just take more money because they can control their own paychecks. But the amazing trick that the Republicans have pulled is causing average working people to think that taxes actually matter to them, when in fact, they only matter to rich people. If I'm not making sense or this is not clear, give me a call and I'll explain it even further. But I think, it's fairly straightforward. I wrote about this at HartmannReport.com. You can find it at HartmannReport.com. It's titled How the GOP Suckered America on Tax Cuts, if you want the details. So I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with you. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Mike in Cincinnati. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was just calling to talk to you about term limits and whether maybe age
age limit would be a more appropriate suggestion rather than a term limit. Seems like everybody should retire at some point, and past a certain point, you just start hurting more than you start helping.
Right.
And even yourself, it seems like you're a little short with callers this morning. It seems maybe you didn't have a very good but
no, it's just it's fall, and this is actually my fault. I should have mentioned to Mark, our new phone screener, that we want people to be on topic. Now we do the kind of anything goes during the summer, but not during the rest of the year. But thanks for being on topic and talking about term limits. My concern about age limits, even, for example, like I said, Bernie Sanders is 81 years old. He's the same age as Mitch McConnell, and he's the Energizer Bunny. I would not want him to leave because of his age. On the other hand, I can't pull a name to mind immediately, but I've known of people in their 60s and 70s who clearly shouldn't be in Congress because of their age, because they just didn't age well. You know what I mean? So I think it should be up to the voters, Mike. You could probably build a case for the Senate because that's a 6-year term, but this is a democracy. We're all supposed to decide on a case-by-case, person-by-person basis.
Well, what about the Supreme Court then, where you had people who just stayed in, assuming that they would have a presidential successor of a favorable party come in and nominate someone so that they could retire?
Well, that's a whole different thing, because we don't elect.
Ginsburg.
Right. My point is, we already have term limits. They're called elections. The Supreme Court is not subject to elections. So term limits for the Supreme Court are entirely appropriate. It's a completely different situation. You can't vote somebody off the Supreme Court. You can only basically put them on, and even that's done by proxy through the president and the Senate. So term limits in the Supreme Court make a lot of sense to me. But any venue where there's an election, I don't get it. I'm not in favor of it. Mike, I need to move along, but thanks for the call, and thanks for the thoughtful comment there. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, yes, how you doing? I was listening to the Joe Madison show one day, and he said this, and I think you agree with it. He said Nixon was a politician who turned crook. Trump was a crook who turned politician. What do you think about that?
I think it's true. And Joe is one of the wisest men I know. And anything Joe says, you can generally take to the bank. And he's right. Nixon was a politician who became corrupt. I mean, there's some evidence that when he was vice president in the White House, he was corrupt. But the real corruption came in when he got the White House in 68. He took a $1 million bribe or a $500,000 bribe, cash bribe from the milk lobby. He took a $1 million bribe from Jimmy Hoffa. He was, and of course he tried to break into and then cover up the break-in of the DNC and all that stuff. So yeah, Nixon was a politician who became corrupt. Trump has been corrupt his whole entire life. I mean, he and his dad were grifters. He's been, running a scam. I mean, back in the 70s, he had set this thing up, I believe, for his father's real estate company, where they had a phony company that was doing repairs, and they weren't actually doing the repairs. They were just billing for them on the property that they had that was low-income housing, where they could bill the federal government for the repairs that they said they made that they didn't make. I mean, that was documented by the New York Times 5 years ago. So, this guy has been a grifter and a hustler and a scam artist his whole entire life. Is that your point, Tyrone?
Yes.
Okay, well made. Thank you very much for that. Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
You got it, Tom. I got a question and a comment about Trump supporters. I know a lot of Trump supporters, plumbers, dentists, electricians, good people. And my question to you, Tom, if you are a Trump supporter, in my opinion, you have to be a racist whether you realize it or not, because his whole shtick is racism. He's the ultimate racist. What's your opinion on that, Tom?
It's the foundation of his shtick, yes. I don't disagree. And my sense of it is that probably the vast majority of Trump supporters are racists.
Whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, well, I think, arguably that's a point. The whole thing about white privilege, the biggest thing about white privilege is that you don't know it. The benefit, the biggest benefit of white privilege is not having to think about race. And whereas if you're not white in this country, you have to think about race all the time because, it's like you're walking around wearing a mark, and that can cause you to be the victim of everything from, workplace discrimination to being shot dead by police or by just some random racist. And so I think it's possible for white people to not be aware of their own racism. It's kind of a stretch, I think, for any thoughtful white person. But I don't know. At the moment, I can't think of anybody who I know as a long-term friend who is a Trump supporter. I don't. Now, I probably have some that I just, don't know. But it seems to me that America, or at least in the white community in America, has largely segregated itself into racist / Trump supporters and people who aren't racists and who are appalled by Donald Trump. For the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've seen people, even within families, sorting themselves that way, which is, kind of a tragedy. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Tom, in my humble opinion, if you support Trump, you have to really have a little contemplation within yourself and ask yourself why you support a racist.
There are people, I think, and I'm thinking of one guy who calls into this program fairly regularly, who believe that illegal immigration, that people who are here without documentation are harming middle-class people by lowering wage rates. And that's an argument that it makes a lot of sense. It's not entirely true. There is a small element to it. It's not the main thing that has been depressing wages over the years. It's not even really a secondary thing, but it can play a role. And so there may be some people who are supporting Trump, or at least supporting Trump's policies, not because they're horrified that people are coming in who are brown people, but that they just think that, if they want to stabilize the U.S. population. I get that. I think they're misguided. But I don't think that they are necessarily racists. They just don't have a complete understanding of the American economy. But, that's about it. I don't know. It's a great question, Bob. Is it possible to be a Trump humper, to be a Trump supporter, and not be a racist?
Tom, you're very generous and you have a great show. But I think you're throwing the lifesaver in the water for them.
I may well be, Bob.
That's okay.
I always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think if you don't, you're not a fully human. I mean, we have to, let's respect other people's humanity. And I think the other thing that colors my perception, Bob, is that, I lived in Germany for a year and I worked for this German-based charity for, 3 decades. And it was started by a guy who was a Nazi. He had been drafted into the German army when he was 20 years old, Hitler's army. He was sent to Iran as a spy because he spoke Farsi and Arabic. And very early in the war, got parachuted into a British camp and arrested. And he spent the whole war in a prison camp. And during that time, he had this conversion experience. He became a vegetarian. He said, I'll have nothing more to do with war. I'm going to practice peace. He thought becoming a vegetarian would cause his own death from malnutrition. Instead, he got healthier. He went back after the war. He went back to Germany, and he started this international relief agency and communities for war orphans, across Germany, and then, spread out all around the world. And I knew several people who worked for him, and one of them, Horst von Heyer, became a very, very good friend, who was a member of the Nazi youth. And these people, he was 16 at the time the war ended. And these were people who I got to know really, really well, and they were thoroughly disgusted with what the Nazis did in retrospect. But they were also swept up in the moment at that time. And you know, and you can't say that the Nazis weren't racist. I mean, that was the core of the whole thing, was kill Jews. So I do think that it's that a completely black and white view of our fellow human beings does us a disservice. That you know, people are more nuanced than that, and there's more.
Great story, Tom.
More to individuals. Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you. And that kind of informs my perspective. I mean, you know, not altogether. I mean, I'm also American. I grew up in this country. I knew racists growing up. You know, I've seen racism. So anyway, interesting question. Do you think it's possible to be a Trump supporter and not be a racist? We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. Back with your calls on the other side of this break. And welcome back. Patrick in East Lansing, Michigan, watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thanks for your email about housing and why it's not affordable. I just wanted to tell you that it connects really nicely to your Federal Reserve, you know, shrinking of the money supply, top of the hour issue.
How so?
Because, you know, well, because we've turned in this country housing into a commodity that's financialized. And Adam Tooze in his book Crash, which everyone should read in Chapter 6, says that housing in the United States, this is residential housing and commercial, monetized on balance sheets in dollar form, is 9.5% of the world's wealth. And what happened under Democrats and Republicans is that we deregulated financializing it, and we gave government subsidy, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and we insured their losses, okay? And that's why we had $12 trillion in home mortgages at the time of the crash in 2007. Now, you know, because I've heard you talk about it, 9 million people lost their homes in 2007. What Adam Tooze tells us is that the mean went from 107,000 down to 58,000. African Americans lost almost all of their wealth. Hispanics, 83%. So why is this so important? What happened next is even more scandalous under Tim Geithner and Treasury, and it's David Serrata's point in his Meltdown podcast, which is a big hit on Audible. He basically shows that with the Biden bankruptcy reform, the residential home that you live in could not be reduced in foreclosure and bankruptcy to the actual market value, even though the rich people's second homes and commercial buildings are all crammed down to the market value. So what they did, because people were stuck with their foreclosed homes at twice the real value, is that they set up a program to spin these off to private equity. A guy named Ed DeMarco did it, who oversaw Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Tim Geithner put him in office. Neil Barofsky was the ombudsman who was banging down the door of the White House to say, don't do this. And this is where private equity got their way in. And that's the real story. So what is it now? 10 million vacant homes held by private equity. Now, across Europe, they've regulated vacant homes, every city in Europe, every country, and they've said, use it or lose it. We're going to tax you if it's vacant. In Barcelona and 10 other cities, they give you a tenant, force you to rent it, because they say housing can't be made a commodity. And last thing I'll say is that this is a story that started under Nixon, and it's why we lost the Great Society and the New Deal social contract. Under Nixon, as Race for Profit tells, which is the great Princeton book by Kenyatta Yamagata Taylor, she basically shows that Nixon set up a program, said it was for poor people. It was ultimately coming out of LBJ's, it's a victory of the March on Washington, but Nixon implemented it. And he set it up so that the people who profited were mortgage lenders and real estate agents, and they turned homes that were falling apart and uninhabitable into profit, and they originated, made money on the origination, put people in homes, loaded them with debt, then rolled them out in 18 months. And she shows that the people it was designed to help were hurt, and then they were blamed, and that's how we got the war on the underclass and the war on the prison.
Was the source of most of your information that you just shared with me Adam Tooze's book, Crash?
It's 3 books. Number 1 is Adam Tooze Crashed. Number 2 is Brendan Ballou's Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America, and that's, in page 44. And then Race for Profit, everyone should read, and it tells the story of Michigan and 10 other states.
Okay, I got it. I got to run. Thank you, Patrick. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. 10 minutes before the hour, welcome back. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, y'all. Happy Labor Day belated.
Yeah, yes, back at you.
Right. You're an expert on Jefferson, so I'm sure you know that before the Louisiana Purchase, there was tension between the masters and their journeymen who had nowhere else to go until the Louisiana Purchase opened up their own territories. I think that a lot of the money trouble and the conflict being distracted is where baby boomers and their parents had a negotiation about retirement back in the 86 compromise. We haven't had one since. It was always supposed to be, the next technological
The 86
wave.
compromise, are you talking about, I thought Social Security was redone in 83.
I'm sure you're right. The deal between Reagan and Tip O'Neill.
Right.
Yes. So,
maybe it was 86.
Because we haven't had that, we've had sort of our own argument about term limits in private and public sector, whether it's Trump or in the reality show Hardcore Pawn, about a Detroit family of pawnbrokers arguing about who should retire, because in the past people didn't live much past 65, so it was a moot point. Well, we've lengthened the ability of the body to function, the brain not so much. So it's almost turned into that CBS comedy Brain Dead, where there's creatures infesting people and they're acting in weird ways.
In the last 3 years, though, in the United States, average lifespan has actually declined, which is the opposite of what's happened in Europe. This wasn't just COVID.
Right. True, but right, yeah. I mean, that's sort of a blip, but it's still well past the 65 that everyone planned for, and so we have this conflict going on of boomers staying on, often much later than their mental state should allow for, in part because it's almost
staying on. You mean surviving or working?
Well, not just surviving, but they're in charge, again, public or private sector, doesn't matter, but their minds are no longer up to the task, and there is no good way to retire them.
I disagree, David. You've got, if I was the employer of somebody who was going senile, I would replace them. If I was on the board of directors of a corporation and my CEO was going senile, I would replace them. And if I was a voter and my representative was going senile, I would replace them.
But if you're Elon Musk and there's no one who can,
well, he's not going senile. He's in his 50s.
But he's still. But it's not clear that he's mentally functional because he's.
Well, are you talking about his rant about the Jews over the weekend? I mean, he's now trying to blame the failures of Twitter, of X now. Their advertising is down 60%, and he's trying to say it's the fault of Jews. I mean, maybe you could make an argument that that's a sign of dementia. I think it's just a sign of anti-Semitism.
It doesn't have to be dementia, just any form of serious malfunction where the person needs to be focusing on his health, mental or physical, and get out of that position.
So what's the point you're trying to make, David?
My point is that we need to figure out the social contract so that you don't have a middle management that's been stuck in the middle for so long because the upper management doesn't realize, how messed up
I get your argument. Let me give you a counter argument.
A gerontocracy.
No, I totally get it, and we do have a gerontocracy right now. The boomers are hanging on, long past, in some cases, long past the sell-by date. I would argue that rather than trying to legislate this or have age limits or whatever, really what we should be doing is increasing Social Security benefits so that people feel comfortable to retire. An awful lot of people, if you look at the surveys on boomers who are not retiring, people who are working in their 70s, and in some cases even in their 80s, what you find is that the majority of them are doing so because they feel that they don't have enough money to retire, that they can't trust Social Security, or it's not that they can't trust it, the Social Security doesn't provide them with enough income to have a decent retirement. So, build increase Social Security benefits and also expand the requirement for actual healthy pensions. Most European countries, you pointed out this is not so much a problem in Europe, most European countries mandate employers, at least large employers, to offer pensions, in addition to a social welfare program, in addition to free health care. If we did that in the United States, I have a feeling a lot of people would just be very, very happy to say, yeah, I'm going to retire and sit here and watch the sunsets and read a good book. Am I making sense?
Is you have the generation that that never trusted anyone over 30. Now they don't trust anyone under 60. It's as if they're transferring their resentment against their parents against their children.
I get what you're saying, David. I don't think it's that simple, but I get what you're saying. Thank you for a thought-provoking call. Chip in Lawrence, Kansas. Hey, Chip, what's on your mind, bud?
Good morning, good afternoon to all you and your listeners, wherever you may be. Hey, you were talking about taxing the wealth, the wealthy. From my understanding, my home state, I live in Kansas now, Lord help me. But from my understanding, Massachusetts has instituted a 4% wealth tax, and that is specifically used for students in schools to get a free lunch. It's access to free lunch for every student.
I don't know about that, Chip.
I've read several articles about it.
I will have to Google it during the break because I didn't know that any states, had actually succeeded in passing a wealth tax. I know that even the idea of a wealth tax, they're trying to. This is part of the Moore versus United States case that the Supreme Court is hearing this year, which is going to be whether they're going to outlaw wealth taxes as being unconstitutional, because Elizabeth Warren keeps talking about it.
I've definitely looked into it, and it's like I've Googled it, and it's like I read it on line, then I went and Googled it. I'm like, oh, this is really awesome.
That is fascinating. Okay, Chip, I'll check it out. Thanks for the tip. I'm surprised I wasn't up on that, but you can't do everything. We'll be right back. Housing. How do we protect one of the basic essentials of life? What's going on with housing in America today? Patrick mentioned this in his call earlier. I want to do a deep dive on it on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club is Trump U, Promises, Lies, and Corruption, My Battle with Donald Trump's Fake University by Art Cohen with Dan Good. This is from Chapter 1, The Art and the Deal. I was in a vulnerable place. I found myself jobless in early 2009 after my consumer electronics company went through a forced sale. I'd poured my life into Ariel Inc. You might remember our Audio Bug FM transmitters, ladybug-shaped devices that aired music from portable devices over a car radio. After Apple's iPod became all the rage, we developed, manufactured, and licensed products for major retailers and brands such as Best Buy's Dynex, Iriver, Kensington, SanDisk, XM Radio, and Delphi. Later, we looked to expand our wireless music transmission offerings with our own i21 brand, working seamlessly with the debut in 2007 of a new iPhone. Everything was going well until it wasn't. The consumer electronics industry was hit hard by the 2008 recession. Our major investor wanted to restructure the company and install new management. I was out as CEO in 2009. I wanted to find something new and fast. It wasn't a great time to be unemployed. The national economy was tanking, and to top it off, Silicon Valley isn't a cheap place to live. I worried about providing for my wife and 2 sons. At age 44, I found myself at a crossroads, an inflection point in my career. After spending 5 years as a CEO, I wanted to do something different and carve a new path. And then I came across a special invitation in the mail and a full-page ad in the San Jose Mercury News promoting an opportunity. Do you think you can profit in this market? You can, and I'll show you how, proclaimed the advertiser's headline underneath a photo of real estate developer Donald Trump. The ad promised the opportunity to learn from Donald Trump's hand-picked experts. He's the most celebrated entrepreneur on earth. He's earned more in a day than most people do in a lifetime. He's living a life many men and women only dream about, and now he's ready to share with Americans like you the Trump process for investing in today's once-in-a-lifetime real estate market. Come to this free introductory class, and you'll learn from Donald Trump's hand-picked instructors a systematic method for investing in real estate that anyone can use effectively. You'll learn foreclosure investing from the inside out. You'll learn how to finance your deals using other people's money. You'll learn how to overcome your fear of getting started. End quote. The ad featured a guarantee attributed to the man himself. I can turn anyone into a successful real estate investor, including you. So, why not me? Donald Trump was a name I trusted. I grew up in Philadelphia, less than 100 miles from Trump's home base, New York City, so I was familiar with his success as a real estate developer and as an author of the 1987 bestseller, The Art of the Deal. I'd made the hour-long drive to Atlantic City, New Jersey a couple times, and his last name was splashed across the casinos, T-R-U-M-P, and flashing lights. I consider the name Trump synonymous with success and wealth. At least that's what it meant for me back then. During the mid-'80s, while a student at Drexel University, I was one of the co-founding members of the D-Users, widely acknowledged as the first Macintosh users group. I was invited to a Hollywood-style event called Going National, hosted by Drexel on its campus. There, I met the legendary Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. His inspiring talk that day imagined future computers using artificial intelligence to have conversations with the dead. Not literally, but using inputs known about, for example, Abraham Lincoln. The AI would bring Lincoln to life so you could have a modern-day conversation with him as if he were alive today. Jobs' talk inspired me to lead a team tasked during a competition with imagining the personal computer of the year 2000. There we were, to present our vision with an impressive panel. Science fiction writer Ray Bradbury, futurist Alvin Toffler, education writer and historian Diane Ravitch, computer pioneer Alan Kay, and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. A team from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign won the competition. They envisioned a tablet device that sounded an awful lot like the eventual iPad. During a luncheon, I got to sit at a table with Bradbury, and we began talking. He was amiable. He told me how his writing career didn't take off right away. He kept at it, day by day, year by year, and eventually success and fame found him. I love science fiction, and Fahrenheit 451 is one of my favorite books. Besides my father, Bradbury probably inspired me more than anyone else as a writer, something I enjoy doing in my spare time. The Project 2000 contest was beneficial in another way. It allowed me to connect with Apple employees and give them my resume. By 1989, I was moving to California as an Apple employee. I worked as an engineer at Apple until the mid-'90s, during the time before Steve Jobs returned to the company. I left to join a company called General Magic, where I worked on product and project management. During my time there, I bumped into a French-born computer programmer who said his wife came up with an idea about selling stuff from around the house online. Everybody laughed about it. I guess Pierre Omidyar got the last laugh. His creation, Auction Web, was later renamed eBay and became one of the world's leading e-commerce companies. I bounced around several tech companies in Silicon Valley, including Coraco, Oracle, and Philips Semiconductors. At one point, I tried my hand at law school, taking classes at night. Philips was picking up the tab. Classes were challenging and my head wasn't in it. It was a big commitment and I ended up only going for a year. My passion remained with high tech. After moving to California, I didn't keep close tabs on Donald Trump. I wasn't aware of his casino empire cratering or his massive, massive debt. The book is Trump U by Art Cohen with Dan Good.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. I wanted to share with you my op-ed that I published today at hartmannreport.com, and if you're a subscriber, you got it in the email this morning. It's titled, Housing. How do we protect one of the primary essentials of life? And you know, it's basically about how the cost of housing has gone up, and that has provoked, that is the major driver of this nation's homelessness problem. Zillow published a study a year and a half ago or thereabouts, in which they really did a deep dive on this. And what they found was that when housing prices, or actually rent, they were looking at rent rates, rental rates, which reflect, you know, housing prices affect rent. That when rent was up above 32% of neighborhood income, take-home pay, when rents exceeded 32% of neighborhood income, actually it might have been gross, I don't know, homelessness begins to explode. And the relationship between the percentage increase in rent above 32% and the percentage of homeless as a percentage of the community is a linear relationship. It actually, these two things increase in parallel with each other consistently. And there are a lot of communities in America where, you know, this is the case. I tell the story in this article about how, you know, in 1956, I remember this because I was a little kid, it might have been 1957. I was 5 or 6 years old. And my dad bought a new house. He had, you know, we had lived in this little, basically one-room rental in downtown Lansing, in kind of a sketchy part of town. And you know, I mean, we were genuinely poor. We were eating macaroni and cheese from the surplus store, and we did all our shopping at the Salvation Army, which I, to this day, still love. I mean, I didn't realize we were poor. But then my dad, again, because he was making a living selling World Book encyclopedias and Rexair vacuum cleaners door to door. And that's a tough way to make a living. But when I was 5 or 6 years old, he got a job at Lansing Die Sinking, or Lansing Tool and Die, a tool and die shop, and joined the Machinists Union. And boom, suddenly we were in the middle class. And so in 56 or 57, Dad bought a new house in the south part of Lansing, a little 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom ranch house for $13,000. At the time, that was about twice what his income was. The $13,000 house, his income at that time was probably around $6,000 or $7,000 a year. Now, you know, we'd have to inflation adjust all those numbers, but here's the kicker. In the 1950s, according to the Federal Reserve, the average price of a single-family home was 2.2 times the national average for income. In 2021, The median price of the average home, $374,900, was 10 times average median income, which was $35,805. So we went from housing costing twice what your annual income is to housing costing 10 times what your annual income is. And, you know, the result of that is homelessness. People can't afford housing. The result of that is higher rents. People can't afford rent. Now, what has been driving this? It turns out that, you know, there's been a number of things driving this variable, but the biggest one is the financialization of housing. It's that Wall Street has jumped into the housing market, the single-family residential home housing market, with both feet in a big way. In some towns, they're buying pretty much, you know, every house that becomes available. And they're sitting on millions of empty homes, millions of overpriced homes. You know, they just buy them as investments. The other one, so that's Wall Street. Wall Street is driving most of this. The other thing that's driving some of this is foreign investment. You've got the Russian oligarchs with their ill-gotten gains laundering money through real estate. This is, you know, probably as much as half of Donald Trump's revenue since the 90s when his casinos went bankrupt and he had to declare bankruptcy 6 different times. You know, what came out of that was, as Eric and Don had both said in public, that big Russian money came in. I mean, that one Russian oligarch in particular who bought an $11 million property for $54 million, if I'm remembering right. It's something like that in those kind of number areas. That was obviously just an attempt to give Donald some money. But, you know, this is money laundering, big time. From that to just rich people looking for good investments. You've got a lot of Chinese billionaires who are buying property in the United States. They buy it up. They don't have any desire to even rent it out. We have millions of empty homes in America. In fact, there are more empty homes in America right now than there are homeless people in America. And virtually all of them are owned by either wealthy foreigners or Wall Street firms that are looking to make a buck and have said, you know, housing in the United States is a great investment. Will Rogers was right. Buy land. They ain't making it anymore. And in fact, for 60%, excuse me, let me rephrase that. For middle-class people, 60% of their wealth, on average, is their home. And you can't build that 60% of your wealth if you're only renting. Every month, your money is going to pay somebody else's mortgage. So if you want to get into the middle class, kind of one of the preconditions, I can tell you, you know, well over half of my personal wealth, mine and my wife's, is our home. I mean, this is how you do it. This is how most middle class people build their wealth, is by, you know, just over time, you buy a more expensive house and a more expensive, you just kind of work your way up the housing market. And that's your investment. It's your best investment. But when housing costs are 10 times income, that locks an awful lot of people out of the housing market. And so now what we're seeing is more and more people are renting, and because they're renting, they don't have the ability to build that wealth. So how do we solve this problem? I don't get into that in great detail in my article today, and it probably should be the topic of a subsequent article. But there are a number of things that we can do to solve this problem. Number one, we could pass a law saying that there is a tax on empty houses. If a house is empty for more than 6 months, then there's a tax on that. This would probably be more functionally done at the state level, but it could be done at the federal level. Number two, although I think it would be a substantial bureaucratic burden. Number two, we could ban corporate and foreign purchases of more than a certain number of houses. Companies may not buy more than 5 houses. Foreigners may not buy more than 3, for example. Because right now you've got Chinese billionaires who own thousands of homes in the United States. Bill Gates owns millions of acres in the United States, including a lot of homes. Just, ban it or tax it. That's fine. You want to buy 3 houses? That's okay. You want to buy the 4th house? We're going to put a 10% surcharge on that. By the way, somebody called in the last hour, at the very end of the last hour, and said Massachusetts had passed a 10% or a 4% wealth tax. I looked it up because I was pretty sure that there are no wealth taxes in the United States, taxes on your actual wealth. They're calling it a wealth tax, but it's not. It's a 4% surcharge on people who make more than $1 million a year. So it's a tax on the wealthy. It's not a wealth tax. But anyhow, back to housing. So we could do it through tax policy. We could do it by basically outlawing empty houses. We could do it, one of the things that we did in the 60s and 70s was build more low-income housing. That prevented an awful lot of homelessness. But the bottom line is homelessness, I posted this on Twitter, on X, and, a couple of, Musk has tweaked the algorithm, so conservatives are getting my posts now, and it's just amazing the vitriol and the hate and the anger that I'm getting. Particularly when I posted my piece on income taxes yesterday, they went nuts. It's funny to read, actually, if you read my feed. But somebody posted this morning, said in response to it, well, who says people have a right to housing? What are you, some kind of communist? Well, people being unhoused, people not having housing, doesn't just hurt them. It hurts society. It hurts all of us. It harms economic growth. It harms our social fabric. It's generally destructive right across the board. And this is a problem that we have in the United States right now and that we had in the United States in the early 1930s. And Franklin Roosevelt fixed it in the 1930s by putting people to work, giving them good jobs, and creating the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA. But it's, we've got a long way to go with this. And the situation is, I would say dire. So let's get our act together here. Let's do something about housing. Particularly that Zillow study that noted, this is a quote from the Zillow study, across the country, the rent burden already exceeds the 32% of median income threshold in 100 of the 386 markets included in this analysis. Wow. That's why you've got homelessness. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Did you know that just 2 people account for most of the book ban requests in Florida? I'll tell you about that after the break. Stay with us. And welcome back. Beverly in Conyers, Georgia. Hey, Beverly, what's on your mind today?
I'm calling because someone called some time ago and said that people who are racist may not know that they are. And I just totally refute that. I feel that either they don't have a brain, but mostly they don't have a heart.
Well,
and they have
that
no
probably
idea
describes
that
a lot of people.
Yes, it does.
I don't mean to be flip about it, Beverly, but.
Yes, that's my retort for today. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Beverly. I think you're absolutely right. Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Here, as regards Wisconsin and the oligarchs that are ruining everything here, Robin Vos, who is the Speaker of the Assembly, has worked with the Republicans to dedicate almost $2 million of public money to retain their gerrymandered districts because they're very, very worried about what you were just talking about with the lawsuit working its way to the state Supreme Court. And this is frustrating no end because this is what they do. They've been dipping into public money to advance their stunts, to advance their voter restrictions, to do everything. And then they turn around and raise more money on it.
Wow.
And they did that. Yeah, seriously. They did this right after the election. They installed a former disgraced and diselected Supreme Court Justice, last name of Gableman, to head up this project. In fact, he was the project, but he had to hire some people to investigate a clean election, right? Because, well, we just want to make sure there's no voter fraud. When that had not only been litigated in the 2020 election, it had been litigated years before. When the prior Republican Attorney General was trying to make that case, remember George Bush and all those guys were doing that, took it to the court, and the court said, where's your evidence? And he produced no evidence and got thrown out of court.
Right.
So, but they still perpetuate the myth. They're raising money on it. They're using taxpayer money. And I am, for one, really upset about it.
So you apparently Judge Janet Protasewicz was...
Yeah, I can't pronounce it either.
Yeah, was put into office on August 1st. I got that wrong earlier, that she's been in office now for a month.
Yeah.
When is this gerrymandering case going to come before the Supreme Court? And what is the status, to the best of your knowledge, of the effort to impeach her?
I don't. Well, see, there's a lot of Republicans still that are kind of like in borderline districts. I don't think the effort to impeach her is going to work. I honestly don't
either.
Unless they want to see a whole bunch more of 200,000 of us up on the square scaring the hell out of the legislature like we did back in 2011 when they were busting our unions.
I think that's a price they're willing to pay.
It could be.
I just don't think they're going to succeed legally.
But I'm disgusted at the amount of stuff that they're getting away with. I did contact a firm named Law Forward here. You can only reach them by email, and they represent voter interest. They're very much on the gerrymandering thing, so I'm backing that.
Okay, well, good on you, Kathy. Thank you for the information, and thanks for the call. Great talking with you. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stay with us. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. It's 23 minutes past the hour, and this is just an incredible story. 2 people, Bruce Friedman and Vicky Baggett, have filed, well, actually, let me give you a little background here. The legislature in Florida passed a law, and DeSantis signed it, that required school officials to remove any content, quote, deemed inappropriate or harmful to minors, and then encouraged parents to file complaints. Whenever a parent files a complaint, that triggers a review of the book, which means that the school district has to spend resources. People have to, teachers or employees of the school district have to read the books, have to evaluate the books, have to write up a summary of why they should or should not be removed from the curriculum. It's a huge burden for public schools. Now, this is part of the nationwide Republican campaign that has been rolling really, really hard since the Reagan Revolution. Now, arguably, it goes back to 1954, Brown versus Board, but it's really taken on, momentum, starting with the Reagan Revolution and the appointment of Bill Bennett as the education secretary. Their goal is to shut down public schools altogether. Right-wing billionaires do not want an educated populace. They want serfs. So this bill said, yes, please harass your local school district. And these two people really took it to heart. Bruce Friedman is a 57-year-old former New Yorker who now lives in Clay County, Florida. He filed more than 400 complaints. Many of his challenges, this is from the Tampa Bay Times editorial board, many of his challenges provided little more explanation than, quote, protect children, exclamation mark, and damaged souls, exclamation mark. Some appear to be photocopies with only the titles and authors changed. And then Baggett, where did her first name go? Vicki Baggett is a high school teacher in Escambia, Florida. She filed 178 complaints, or about 80% of those submitted in the county in which she lives. On each form, she said that she had read the material in its entirety, but the New York Times, the Tampa Bay Times, found the language in many of the complaints appear to be pulled from a website launched by a member of Moms for Liberty, a group at the forefront of the movement to ban books. Neither Friedman or Baggett answered the Times' request for interviews. Friedman told Fox News he started his crusades after his teenage son suffered considerable harm while attending New York City's public schools. Oh, God. He went on to found the Florida chapter of No Left Turn Education, which opposes, quote, progressive indoctrination. And he learned about the group while watching Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Incredible. And finally, a geeky science alert for you. This is a massive study, 136,393 participants in South Korea. They looked at all kinds of variables, medical history, fat measurements, laboratory measurements, alcohol consumption, smoking, exercise, physical activity, education, hypertension, body mass, blood pressure, fasting serum glucose, hemoglobin, serum uric acid levels, and insulin resistance. And what they found was there was one single variable that consistently predicted the onset of depression. And that was the consumption of sugary beverages, the regular consumption of beverages that contain sugar, whether it was super sugared coffee or whether it was soft drinks. They note, even after accounting for other control variables, the researchers found a significant positive association between sugar-sweetened carbonated beverage consumption and the risk of depressive symptoms. As sugar-sweetened carbonated beverages consumption increased, the risk of depressive symptoms also increased proportionally. It's an amazing study. It was published in Scientific Reports, if you want to track it down.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So stay away from those sugary carbonated drinks. They also are not sure whether the sugar-free ones that your body thinks are sweet cause the same problem. That's the next study. Club today is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960 and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espen: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, health care, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, ever could. Age of Discovery. Fascinating. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. You know, Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist. But we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Ken in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's up?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I wanted to comment on the term limits.
Mm-hmm.
I got a new twist for you. I think presidential elections should be 6 years. You know what? If you can't get your agenda done in 6 years, there's a problem. That way you're not spending all your time and money, running for office all the time like we do in this country, which is so foolish. And furthermore, I think that 70 should be the cutoff for political office, especially in the Congress and the Senate. That's plenty of time to have done whatever you needed to do. You made plenty of money in the interim, and move on. And you know what? These positions were never intended to be careers. Okay?
They absolutely were intended to be careers, Ken. George Washington was a career politician. Thomas Jefferson was a career politician. James Madison was a career politician. All of those guys who founded this country were career politicians. They intended for that. They realized that there were some people who wanted to serve the public, and there are other people who wanted to serve themselves. And they wanted people who wanted to serve the public to have an opportunity to do so.
Okay, but I also believe, do your thing and move on. Let somebody else get in with
Why?
Different ideas and whatnot.
Why would you say that? Would you say that to a corporate CEO who was doing a good job? Get the hell out of here because you just did a great job. Thank you very much. You're out.
Well, that happens on a pretty regular basis. Starting with Disney CEO there a few years back.
Jack Welch ran GE for what, 20 years? I mean, no, it's not uncommon for CEOs in business to be there for decades. When they do retire, it's typically because they finally made their first billion or their final 300 million or whatever. But I think term limits. We have term limits. They're called elections. I think it should be up to the damn voters.
Yeah. I live in Lauren Boebert's district, and we have 3 county commissioners here, all Republicans. You couldn't get them out of there with dynamite. The chair of the county commissioners, when he came in 20-some years ago, the first thing he did was eliminate term limits.
Yeah, but that's a problem with the voters, not the politicians, Ken. Your voters keep reelecting these people. They've been around forever because the voters want them. I get it that you're not happy about it.
I'm in a red district for sure.
Yeah, no, it happens in blue districts too. But I don't think that a good, competent politician, a person who is really genuinely wanting to serve the public, somebody like Bernie Sanders or Sheldon Whitehouse, who's been around there for a long, long time, or Joe Biden for that matter. He's been in politics since he was in his 20s. I think he was elected when he was 26. I don't think that those people should be kicked out just because they want to serve their country and they've done a good job.
And they're getting old. In another way, another capacity?
Well, they could, but that should be up to them and the voters.
Yeah, I guess. But, I mean, I have to think, though, that, I'm 72. But, cognitive decline has to have set in to some degree.
Well, that should be apparent to the voters.
Yeah.
I mean,
rant.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Ken. Good to hear from you. Jessica in Monterey. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I wanted to talk about how all Trump supporters are racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, because you see a lot of non-white Trump supporters, and I think that, and this may be an oversimplification, that they're bullies. And especially in small towns where they're not exposed to people unlike themselves, that they kind of stick with, and I'm from a small town, but I also live in a big town. A lot of people don't really get over high school,
mm-hmm.
where you have your cliques and you have the bullies, and then you have the people that are perceived to be weaker and they're just and that's why they like Trump. He's a bully just like them.
I think you're absolutely right, Jessica. I think that that's a huge variable, and I had not gotten my mind wrapped around it in a way as clearly and tightly and articulate as you had just done. But I would, to put it in more kind of psychological language, I would say these are the authoritarian followers that John Dean wrote about in his book Conservatives Without Conscience. They just want Big Daddy to protect them, to make them feel safe. They want an authoritarian leader. They want somebody who is a bully. They themselves are bullies. Most authoritarians are. Although their bullying is largely limited to their family or acquaintances or the workplace. The tough guy, the Mussolini, the I'm gonna kick ass on your behalf. That's what appeals to that. I think you're absolutely right. I'm guessing for the Trump supporters who aren't supporting him because of racism, that's probably the #1 reason that they like the fact that he's a bully.
Yeah, and also if you think about a lot of the Republican politicians are coaches. Like kind of the
Tommy Tuberville, you mean, the football coach?
Yeah, like 50s, 60s movies, where they have like the bullies are always like the jocks and they're into sports, and the weaker, ones, the people they bully are the smarter ones, the nerds.
Right.
And I feel like there's kind of there's that correlation within also the politicians.
Yeah.
The Republican side versus the nerdy, Democratic side.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right.
Anyway, that was my theory.
I think you nailed it, Jessica, and you've helped me clarify my own thinking on this. I think you're absolutely right that it's the appeal of authoritarianism is even greater for many people than the appeal of racism. And brilliant,
and
Jessica.
Couple that with Fox brainwashing, and there you go.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably true of almost all cults. And, the Trump base has essentially become a cult. I mean, I think by pretty much any definition, including they're willing to kill themselves for him, not wearing masks and not getting vaccines and things. It's bizarre.
My theory also into combating it is that I feel like the other side needs to really put out the message that if you are supporting Republicans and Donald Trump, then you're the party of domestic terrorists, racists, fascists, and to make it almost socially unpopular to believe that.
I think we're getting there.
The smoking campaign, or even after civil rights, is not acceptable to be a racist, and that has to kind of go back to where it was.
Yeah. I think that's actually happening. But I think your analysis is spot on. Jessica, I need to move along. Thank you for the call. That was very thoughtful. I really appreciate it. Tony in Long Beach, California. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was telling your screener, to me, we can't just put racism just on the Republican Party. And trust me, as a black woman, I am not taking up for them. But my thing is, I think all white people are taught very early on to be racist. I mean, you have the power to be racist. You have everything. They still are doing that doll test with children, and children as little as like 3-4 years old, the white children know that they're better than the black children. Okay, so my thing is the white people that want to deal with it, just say yourself, you've done enough studying, history, the law, you have to decide in yourself that you want to fight it and be anti-racist. Now, you can't be anti-racist, but that's a decision a white person has to make. And I think, to be honest, that's something that you have to do because you want to. Okay, everybody else doesn't care, doesn't want to do the work, they don't want to learn anything. I mean, just like what you were just saying earlier in one of your reports about Zimbabwe or whatever, same stuff happens here.
Yeah.
Black people are getting killed like 40 going west, as we used to say. And the Democratic Party I don't see an anti-black hate bill executive order. And who gets more hate crimes than black people?
Yep.
I mean, when you look it up.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Tony. And I can only speak for myself. I catch myself, not so much in the last few years, but when I was in my 40s or maybe 50s, early 50s, when I started to really understand what white privilege was and started to understand that myself, when I saw black people, and not just black people, by the way, I mean, there's other minorities, that my initial, the assumptions that I made about them were different than the assumptions I made about white people. And that's because I grew up in a world where there were no black people on television unless they were either minstrels or bad guys. And there were and all the heroes were white and all the bad guys were black. And I'm a product of that. I acknowledge that. I fight it. I'm awake to it. I don't like it. I don't see it anywhere near as much in my kids and my grandkids. And I think that, the generations coming up where television has lots of diverse faces on it, and I think that's a really good thing. And movies are diverse, and there's. I think that we can kind of flush this out eventually, but we've got a hell of a long way to go, Tony. You're absolutely right.
A hell of a long way, and that's what I'm just saying. It's never fails that if you have a conversation long enough with someone, something pops up, no matter what, no matter how liberal, no matter how open-minded. Like I said, if a country can teach an entire people, my people, to hate ourselves, then there's no way white people are not affected.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Tony, thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you. We'll be right back. 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be back with your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. Picking up your calls. By the way, Larry, our math guy friend, I'm gonna pick up your call on the other side of the next break. So just hang in there. I'll be back with you in 5 minutes. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, Larry, love you. Okay. I'm calling about how the GOP suckered America on tax cuts.
Yeah, we all love Larry, by the way. Yes. Yes, okay.
There you go. Yeah. And I agree with your thesis, except for I feel that if the Democrats really want to win big in 24, they need to be talking about large tax cuts for the working class.
I know, and even though those will not help the working class at all, and in fact they will eventually lead to a decrease in working class salaries, it will always help you get elected if you campaign on tax cuts. I mean, it's just that simple.
Yes, and I think we need to do that for the fall to win big, which is what we need to do. And I think that's the key to going over the line of just maybe winning to winning big. And it's a point I've been on for a little while now, and I just wanted to call that to attention because I'd like to keep yelling that out loud. We need tax cuts.
Yeah, as a political strategy, it's brilliant. As an economic strategy, it's stupid. But we're talking the politics here, Ziggy, and you're absolutely right. And I'm guessing that you probably will see some Democrats calling for that. Thanks for the call, Gary in Monroe, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Great program today. Once more. I think you brought up
Did
earlier,
you move out of Alpharetta, or did you always live in Monroe?
I thought you might ask. I actually moved.
Oh, cool. Okay, so what's
you
on
know
your
where
mind?
Monroe is, probably, right?
Say that again?
You probably know where Monroe, Georgia.
I've never been there.
Probably.
I don't know. I know
you
Alpharetta.
Yeah, I know you lived outside in Georgia, but it's just southeast of. It's about 50 miles southeast of Atlanta.
Oh, okay, cool. So what's on your mind?
So I thought I'd just comment quickly. You brought up a great subject, this disparity we have in housing prices, and it goes into rent prices then, and it's hurting the American people. It's a progressive issue that a good progressive candidate should bring up in starting right now. And Yeah, 10 times. It's 10 times the annual income of an American today.
Yeah.
Versus, what was it? It
was 2.2 times in 1956.
Yeah, when your father bought his first house, correct?
His only house, yes.
Okay.
He died in that house.
So I think I have to go always back. The part that bothers me, I think it comes back to the core problem. The core problem is this culture of greed that we have in America.
Yep.
And what's really doubling and tripling down the effect of it is the cold falling of the Trumpsters. If you put those two together, you have a massive cultural problem, which we have today.
So, yeah, I get the GOP and greed, but the Trumpsters?
Well, that's part of the culture. And I'll leave with this, the FDR quote.
Yeah.
The test of progress is not to give more to the abundance of those who have much, but to provide enough for those who have too little. That's the answer.
There you go. I'm with you. Gary, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The perfect progressive or liberal statement it was called back in the day. We'll be back. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds, and we'll pick up Larry's call. Oh, Larry. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. And we'll welcome back Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'd like to tie a few things together. And by the way, I would take Feinstein over Marjorie Taylor Greene in a New York second.
There you go.
She's young and an idiot, and she's older and needs a little help, but she still does more good than Marjorie Taylor Greene does.
Amen, Larry.
So that's regarding term limits and ageism.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody forgets about what these young Republicans are doing to our country.
Right.
They're not worthy. But I'd like to talk about the one of your callers last week, I think it was, called in and started talking about a formula for any resistance in a system.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the theme that I was trying to get across the last time I called you, when I was telling you that deficits actually are resistance in the flow of money. And it ends up looking like a reduction in the value of the dollar every time. And so that the Democratic Party members always see the dollar rise in value. The Republicans always see it drop. And when you think about the racism, or even let's start with lies relative to truth. The lies are the resistance that's in the system regarding when you're trying to get the truth or knowledge out to people. Mm-hmm. And we saw a really big event of this type happen during the Dark Ages, when the religious leaders and the kings, who were the billionaires of their day, they monetized lies and monetized restricting knowledge that didn't fit their agenda.
Sure.
And that sent us into a Dark Ages period, similar to what's beginning to happen in America right now, where all of these Republicans hate the knowledge that we've accumulated over the years. They hate research. They hate science.
Yeah. And
so then these billionaires have monetized the lie, which is the reason why Right Wing Talk Radio is so prevalent in our country today, and they are the resistance to this society moving forward. And so when you look at voter suppression, that's the resistance to a good society, and racism, the same thing. Deficit spending, these are all things that Republicans are advocating. The lies, they're advocating that. They're banning books, the same thing that happened in the Dark Ages. We are basically entering a new Dark Ages, and the billionaires are bringing it to us by funding the right-wing talk radio host who spread these lies all over, and the TV talking heads, by the way.
Sure. Yeah.
They
Rupert
spread
Murdoch is a
lies.
billionaire too. Yeah.
Right. And I actually look at your program sort of as a think tank for the knowledge. These are people who come from different locations, different backgrounds, like the guy who was talking about the resistance in the system. I actually believe that's true, by the way. I haven't come up with the formula because I've looked at formulas for the economy, and they seem like they're very complicated because they have too many, they seemingly have too many variables. But I do believe that what he was saying was true. It would be actually difficult to come up with a really good equation to point this out. But when you start looking at all the unnecessary resistance in our system, and most of it is caused by Republicans, they are bringing chaos into the equation, because if the truth gets out, they will not gain power. The billionaires recognize that if the truth gets out, they won't get tax cuts. So they're funding the lies. They're funding the American people fighting each other one after another. And Powell currently, this comment that you made about
the money supply.
The money supply. Powell has actually engineered our system to go to the point where even the Federal Reserve is losing billions of dollars now. I think the last number was $30 billion a month.
Wow. Larry, I got to run. I'm sorry, we're out of time. But thank you for everything you said, and my apologies to James and Don and Johan and Olaf and Eric and Tim and Deanne and everybody else on hold right now. We'll pick up your calls tomorrow. Thanks so much for being with us today. We truly appreciate it. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, or it's not democracy. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Stay safe, and we'll catch you on the flip side. We'll talk with you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.